Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're taking a virtual trip to Sundance and reviewing 1001. In A.V. Rockwell's debut feature film, Struggling But Living on Her Own Terms, Inez is moving from shelter to shelter in mid-1990s New York City. With her 6-year-old son Terry in foster care and unable to leave him again, she kidnaps him so they can build their life together. So Jeffrey, what did you think about 1001?
So 1001, I think, is a fairly confident debut from this filmmaker. We were talking before in one of our previous reviews from Sundance that a lot of these independent films are really reliant on strong performances, strong writing, and a directorial sense that is maybe above average, right, for a debut feature. I think that this film, for the most part, maybe for its first 90 minutes, has most of those things. It's building towards a climax that I was really excited for. The film that it was for 90 minutes is really interesting, maybe somewhat conventional, but in a way that I was really emotionally engaged. And then there's a sort of event, or dare I say twist, that happens towards the end of the film that really reframes the preceding 90 minutes in a way that I didn't love, to be honest. I understand why it's there, but the film that I was watching for its first 90 minutes was leading to a climax that didn't happen, and I don't really mean that in a good way. It's not a twist that you can easily see coming, but it also, I don't think, is baked very well into the emotional content of the film, if that makes sense. I know we'll talk about the twist later, but it's really hard to talk about this film without, and we're not going to spoil it, we're not going to talk about what the twist is, but it's really hard to talk about this film without the way that it's reframed towards the end.
I think that is a really good way of putting it, but I do want to jump back and start a little bit from the beginning.
And we should, because I can put myself in the mind frame of what I was watching at first and talk about what's so great about a lot of it.
Yes, this movie by no means is defined by that twist. Yeah. One of the great things about this movie is how beautifully and stylistically it captures 1990s New York City as well as all the preceding years, because this film does jump between different time periods. Also the score, I really love how that played into the stylistic sense of this film.
So I just want to isolate and talk about the score for a second, because I think that this film will be compared to Moonlight when it is ultimately released. And one of the reasons is for those time jumps. There are actors, multiple actors that play her son so that these time jumps make sense. The film is also focusing on marginalized people, but in a more smaller aspect, the score is orchestral in some spots that reminded me a lot of Moonlight. Nicholas Breitel scored Moonlight, and he has that orchestral score that I think Moonlight's very famous for. But at the same time, it brings in these other more rhythmic elements, like a hip-hop type score that is integrated into the orchestral elements that I thought was really interesting and very cool.
And I think the camera plays a role in the life of that as well, because I found the camera movement is very jittery in this film. It's very lifestyle documentary type.
Yeah, it's very cinema verite. I know that's pretentious.
Yeah. But it does, and like other films, it has that very shallow depth of field at times, plays that very humanistic, personal sense that you get. So I do want to talk a little bit more about Inez, because you briefly mentioned her in that conversation. She's played by Teyana Taylor in this film, and I thought she was an absolutely brilliant actress in this movie.
I agree.
One of the things that she has to deal with as an actress in this film is the concept that's built in here is the time jumps, and that we are going from a period in her life where she's in her very early 20s into a place where she's in her mid-30s, probably early 40s. She has to really build a sense of childlike immaturity in the early 20s to being an adult.
Yeah, she has that particular headstrongness that like all 20-year-olds have when they're trying to find themselves. Yeah.
She completely nails these different ways in which her personality has to evolve and change as she gets older.
That's very astute, actually, because she becomes quite a bit wiser as the film goes on. And she has these really interesting things to say to her son as certain revelations come about towards the end of the film. They're actually pretty poignant.
There's this crazy moment that I remember happening in the hospital in which she is with her husband at the time.
It's a great scene.
And I don't want to say too much about it, but there's a beautiful line that she has where she talks about how hurt people can't love other people. Yeah. Something to that degree. And that moment hit me like a brick.
Yeah, me too.
It was so well done, and such a culmination of so many of her life's experiences up until that point. And in a way, this movie is dealing with a lot of those things. It's dealing with systematic failures that plague her and a whole entire community. And also, we're getting a sense of a big theme of the movie is just how her trauma starts impacting her son in a certain way, but also how she is trying to teach him to be better than her, as well as her husband. They're trying to correct the wrongs that they received from their parents or correct the wrongs that they committed themselves and making sure that their child doesn't go down the same path. But also the generational trauma does carry over in a certain way, and that's something that's being dealt with in this movie. There's a lot going on in here.
Yeah, and the film, I think, before this twist that we keep alluding to, before that twist, I think the film is really about intergenerational opportunity and almost, dare I say, like privilege. That's not really the right term to use, but her son is given opportunities that she never would have had, right? So when she sees those opportunities, she's just so angry at the fact that he could even consider not taking them because she understands where she came from and she knows that she never would have seen anything like that. And he may never see anything like that again. It's an extraordinary privilege for him to be able to be even offered some of the things that he's offered in this movie. So I think the tension there is really interesting, especially being a marginalized community. And the film is very good at bringing up some of the things that remind us, things I had forgotten about. So each time jump, it starts with a monologue from the governor of New York at the time in some sort of new policy that he's bringing about that he thinks is great for the city and it's actually not. One of the most notable ones is stop and frisk. There is also
gentrification.
There's also a sense of gentrification. She lives in Harlem. All of the buildings around her are being bought by these wealthy landlords who want to redo it and charge far more money than what she was paying for her apartment. We've seen some films in the past year where we talk about how the personal is always political, and that it's really exemplified in this film.
I think that's one of the things that separates this movie from some other movies dealing with these same experiences. It weaves all these systematic problems in a very personal context, and I found those scenes to be really great. I think there's some mayors in there as well during those overlays. Rudy Giuliani is one of them.
Oh my God, I meant to say mayor and I said governor. Sorry. You should actually leave that in. I meant to say mayor. Yeah, my bad.
Well, we corrected it just now. But I think the great thing about those scenes from a visual perspective is you're hearing all their lofty promises and how they want to change New York City and make it be better. But then you see the personal experiences that they're living on the ground and how either nothing changes or something negatively happens.
Or it only changes for people that can afford to have good changes in their lives. Their lives don't change at all, seemingly.
Yeah, there's this insane scene where her building is sold and the new landlord comes in and he's seemingly so nice. And right when he walked through that door, both you and I were like, something's not gonna happen.
Yeah, we're like, this guy's trouble.
He's going into the bathroom and he's checking out the kitchen. He's like, oh, look at all these broken things. Oh, we could fix this for you. We could take care of it. And for a moment, we were like, oh, that's really nice of him. And she's very happy about it. She's like, oh, these things are gonna get fixed for me. That's really nice of you. He seems very wonderful. And then, of course, he comes back later and he says she has to leave to get these things fixed, and then she could come back. And at that moment, you're like, He is trying to get her out so he could fix it all up and charge more money.
And even if it's less insidious than that, he says something like, well, isn't there a relative that you can stay with? Not understanding, someone in my life said this to me once about social programs. Sorry to go on kind of a tangent. But they said, well, that's what family's for. And they don't understand that not everybody has family. This woman in this film has no family. She lost all of her family, seemingly to drug use. It's kind of alluded to, but not directly said, but she doesn't have anyone. She's reliant on her friends to have a place to stay in the beginning of this film, and if she was ever kicked out of her apartment, she would either be in a homeless shelter or be beholden to her friend's kindness. It's not the same.
And I think one of the wonderful themes about this movie that does get across very well is the perseverance of this character. She is driven and she is looking to make her life better. And that is also one of the more heartbreaking aspects of the movie. She has persevered so far to get her own place and afford it and raise a child and have a husband, and all these things just keep being thrown at her in a way that's very unfair. But her resilience, even when these things come to a T near the end of the film and things start to fall apart in a certain sense, she's a little bit more optimistic about these things and that she can make it through it. So I think that's a wonderful aspect of this movie.
I think there was kind of an unspoken tragedy to some of these time jumps because in the beginning of the film, we see how she loves doing people's hair. That's really what she's passionate about. She loves braiding hair, and she's really good at it. In these time jumps, and the last one, we see her say, oh, I really want to get back to doing hair. Maybe I'll have the time to do that after my son goes to college. So the tragedy of that is there has been a 15-year time gap, and she hasn't been able to do her passion at all, simply because it's the hierarchy of needs. She is beholden to society's these needs, and she needs to fulfill those needs before she can do the things that she wants. So she doesn't even have time or money or anything, any sort of resources to do the things she wants, which is really tragic.
So getting to this twist, and while we can't discuss the twist in itself,
We will not spoil the twist.
I do tend to agree with you that I feel like it is a jump that unfortunately distracts us from a lot of the meaningful things this movie has to say.
I agree.
It is building this wonderful relationship between a mother and a son. It is talking about these generational traumas. A lot of that which is built, unfortunately, I think, is hindered by this twist.
It becomes something different in its last 30 minutes and about a theme and a certain idea that I just don't think is established very well in the preceding hours.
It's not that the film isn't still meeting those wonderful aspects and qualities and dealing with them in various ways that are beautifully shown, but I think it's just the attention is taken away by the twist that we can't reflect on those very important things.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you tend to think about a film the way that you feel when you leave a film. So if its weakest aspect is in its last 15 minutes, if you don't think about it too much, you could say, oh, that wasn't a very good film. I don't feel that way about this movie at all, but it is unfortunate that it leaves you with the feeling that you didn't have for the preceding 90 minutes, which was quite good.
So you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I'm going to give this film a B. We spent a lot more time talking about the positives and negatives. I think there are a lot more positives than negatives. Namely the performances. I think the performances are just so good in this film. It's really subtle the way that it weaves in this social commentary into a very personal story that I think helped us reflect on what these policies really mean to the people that live through them. I really like this film. Again, it is flawed. I wish some things were done a little bit differently, but it's pretty good.
I agree. I give this movie a B as well. I actually liked it more and more as it progressed up until that twist. I was
agreed.
really getting deep and involved. And all these things were building to something that I felt ultimately were distracted by this twist. But that being said, it doesn't really matter in the end because the performances were absolutely stunning in this movie. It was a wonderful, intimate portrait of life in a particular time and also dealing with very particular people. I just love how all that was shown in a very stylistic sense that I did find to be very unique to a movie that we don't really get to see as often.
And almost this universal theme of the bond and the perseverance of mother and son that I think is really beautiful.
And that's it for a review of 1001. Did you get to see this film at Sundance? If so, let us know in the comments what you thought about it. If not, we look forward to checking it out and coming back and letting us know what you think. As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.